Consider the image that evokes your most searing rage, your deepest, most nauseating irritation within the political landscape. Perhaps it's the fanatical, impenetrable conviction with which an opponent clings to their dogmas, ignoring all facts, or their icy intolerance of any dissenting opinion as if carved in stone, or maybe it's the venomous aggression spewing from screens, or that dead, impenetrable blindness that erects itself between people like an unbreakable border through which no word or meaning can penetrate. This isn't just someone else's stench, not merely an external threat that can be ignored. It's something that gets under your skin, poisons the air around you, making your heart pound in a convulsive, almost uncontrollable fury. It's something that throws you off balance, making you feel both helpless and ready for battle, for a final fight for truth. But what if I dared to tell you this poison, this burning pain you feel is not just an external threat, not merely someone else's defilement thrust upon you from outside? What if it's merely an echo resonating with a long forgotten, repressed part of your own soul, with something you once decided to bury or reject within yourself? Imagine that the most repulsive traits you so easily attribute to them are not their unique vices, but a distorted, grotesque reflection of what you once locked deep inside yourself, deeming it unworthy, dangerous, or shameful. Is not their shadow, but your own, cast upon the vast screen of the world, multiplied and amplified to an unbearable brightness, so that you are finally forced to confront it. This is a shocking, even scandalous truth. What infuriates you about others to the core, to the point of frenzy, is yourself in your unacknowledged, rejected, exiled form. It is your own reflection in the crooked mirror of the political theater. It is in this painful recognition, in this irrational, almost instinctive reaction, that lies not merely a key to unraveling the most complex political conflicts, to understanding their true driving forces, but also a path to unimaginable personal power, to genuine inner freedom you may not have even suspected. Because when we stop projecting our inner demons, our uncomfortable truths onto external enemies, when we dare to look into the eyes of this discarded shadow, we reclaim colossal energy that was spent on this endless rejection, on this exhausting struggle with phantoms, on maintaining the illusion of our own perfection. We achieve wholeness, the ability to see the world not in black and white, not divided into absolute good and absolute evil, but in all its multifaceted complexity, to accept its paradoxes and contradictions, and to learn from them. And most importantly, we begin to act not from a position of fear, resentment, or retaliatory aggression, but from a deep, conscious strength capable of transformation, creation, and genuine dialogue. But why does this mechanism of projection work so flawlessly, with such diabolical efficiency, turning ordinary people into caricatured villains in our eyes? Why does this shadow, once cast, become such a convincing reality that we are ready to fight it to our last breath without realizing we are battling our own reflection, our own unacknowledged part? To understand this, we need to return to the scene of the very first transgression, to where this split began, where the foundations were laid for how we perceive the world, others, and most importantly, ourselves. This is a journey not outward, but inward, to the origins of our deepest convictions and most painful traumas. It is an immersion into the moment when certain qualities capable of becoming our greatest strength were Rejected, branded as bad or dangerous, and forever driven into the dark corners of the soul, awaiting their hour to manifest through others. Our previous reflection invited us to introspection, suggesting we view the rage simmering within us at the sight of those we label opponents as an echo of our own long rejected essence. We spoke of how the most repulsive traits attributed to them, be it fanaticism, intolerance, or arrogance, are actually a distorted, grotesque reflection of our own shadow, projected onto the grand canvas of the world. This realization, like a lamp suddenly lit in a dark room, opens the way to understanding not only external conflicts, but also inner turmoil. But if these demons live within, then when and why did we lock them deep within our souls? Allow me to offer you not just a question, but a journey inward. Recall how your deepest political convictions were formed, your ways of reacting to dissent, your capacity for critical reflection on reality. Was there a moment in your life, perhaps barely perceptible, yet deeply imprinted, when you first learned that qualities so necessary for constructive dialogue, for vibrant, living participation in public life, were declared bad, shameful, or even dangerous? I am speaking of that fragile yet powerful capacity for tolerance in the face of uncertainty, the ability not to demand instant answers, not to cling to black and white truths when the world is colored in all shades of gray. When exactly did mental flexibility, a willingness to compromise, to seek common ground rather than bitter confrontation, come to be perceived as weakness, as a betrayal of principles? Perhaps in childhood, when your desire to understand both sides of a conflict between your parents was perceived as indecisiveness, or in youth, when an attempt to find common ground with representatives of another subculture or political faction was condemned by your circle as spinelessness. Remember the moment when the right to make mistakes, to stumble and get up, was burned out of your consciousness with the brand of shame, when vulnerability in discussion, a willingness to admit you might be wrong, that your arguments might be imperfect, that another's point of view could enrich your own, came to be seen as a threat, an invitation to attack, when the ability to defend your beliefs without aggression, without personal attacks, without a desire to destroy your opponent was branded as naivete, or worse, as a lack of passion, as indifference. Perhaps it was in the schoolyard where an attempt to reconcile warring groups led to ostracism, or in the family where any disagreement with the dominant opinion was met with cold alienation or an angry outburst. A society raised on a cult of infallibility, on the fear of being wrong, on the belief that admitting weakness is tantamount to defeat, inadvertently drives these qualities deep into the shadow. We learn to hide our capacity for empathy, for doubt, for dialogue, because the world around us convinced us these are qualities for losers, for those incapable of winning. And now, these exiled aspects of our soul, like restless spirits, wander in search of an outlet, finding their distorted reflection in those we declare enemies. We see in them what we so carefully hide in ourselves, and we hate them for it because it reminds us of our own imperfection, of our suppressed humanity. This mechanism, deeply rooted in personal experience, is only part of a broader, dynamic, universal principles that govern our perception of others in the political arena. We have spoken of the shadow, of the invisible threads that connect our inner world with the outer. But how exactly do these threads intertwine in the political landscape, turning an opponent not merely into a dissenter, but into something monstrous? This mechanism is universal and operates with frightening precision. Imagine an ancient fear, the fear of banishment from the tribe. In archaic times, this meant certain death. Today, in an era of ideological tribes, this fear has transformed. Disagreement with our group's dogmas, even if internal, feels like a threat to our identity, a risk of being rejected. To strengthen our belonging, we must actively reject the tribe's enemy, projecting onto them everything that seems threatening to our unity. This is not just disagreement, it is an almost instinctive expulsion from consciousness of those qualities that might call into question the integrity of our self or our group. We cannot allow ourselves to see complexity in the other because that would jeopardize our own position within the tribe. Or look at it this way. Every trait we reject, every suppressed quality is like an unpaid debt in the soul's bank. This energy does not disappear. It demands an outlet. If we do not acknowledge our own tendencies towards dogmatism, intolerance, or aggression, it will relentlessly seek an external carrier. And then, as if by magic, we discover these qualities in others, in those who stand on the other side of the barricades. They become the living embodiment of our own rejected impulses, and we unleash upon them all the anger intended for ourselves. This is the energy of an unpaid debt, demanding collection, and most often it is collected at the expense of those we consider different from ourselves. Human history is full of such examples. Remember the ancient myth of the scapegoat. An entire community would place all its sins, all its diseases and misfortunes onto one animal and then banish it into the wilderness. This was a ritual of purification, allowing collective guilt and fear to be removed. In the modern political theater, our opponents play the role of the scapegoat. We project onto them not only our personal unpaid debts, but also collective fears, frustrations, unfulfilled hopes. They become the dumping ground where we cast everything we do not want to see in ourselves and in our tribe. Their demonization is an attempt to symbolically banish our own imperfections, to cleanse ourselves without going through the painful process of self-reflection. However, when we so zealously seek evil outside, we inevitably encounter certain images that seem particularly repulsive to us, as if they were specifically created to be vessels for this projection. We have already touched upon how rage directed at political opponents becomes a reflection of our own rejected facets. But who are these others onto whom we so readily project the darkest corners of our soul, turning them into the embodiment of evil? Look into the mirror of your indignation. Listen to the echo of your own hatred, and you will discern familiar silhouettes. Ask yourself, what types of people in the context of modern political battles evoke in you not just disagreement, but an irrational, almost physical hatred, searing contempt, or uncontrollable irritation? Often three archetypal figures come to the forefront bearing the imprint of our collective and personal shadow. The first is the dogmatic fanatic, a person whose truth is carved in stone, tolerating no dissent, immured in the fortress of their own infallible opinion. They do not doubt, do not seek dialogue, but merely proclaim, brand, judge. Their conviction is not strength, but armor, from which any argument, any doubt bounces off. The second is the hypocritical populist, one who seemingly speaks smoothly, but behind their honeyed words you sense cold calculation, a slippery, manipulative desire for power rather than sincere service. They promise the impossible, play on the lowest instincts of the crowd, and their words, like a chameleon, change color depending on the advantage. And the third is the aggressive opponent. Perhaps you are deeply outraged by someone who does not seek compromise, but only strives to crush. Who sees any dispute as a battlefield, not a space for the exchange of ideas? Their energy is pure, unbridled force aimed at suppression, at destroying another's opinion, and sometimes the opponent themselves. Allow me to give a short example that may seem painfully familiar to you. Imagine you are scrolling through your news feed or watching another political broadcast, and suddenly a familiar face or username flashes by, one that already makes you shudder. This is our dogmatic fanatic. They don't just express an opinion, they pass judgment, asserting something with absolute ironclad certainty that contradicts your deepest beliefs. They don't just defend their position, they brand, they condemn everyone who thinks differently, who allows shades of gray in a world that is exclusively black and white for them. Their words are not arguments, but a hammer destroying any nuances, any attempt at dialogue. They sweep away complexity, reduce the world to a primitive scheme where on one side are they and their righteous ones, on the other, you and your delusions. What do you feel at that moment? Indignation? Helplessness? A desire to smash the screen or enter a hopeless battle, even though you rationally understand its futility? This figure, this dogmatic fanatic, becomes the embodiment of everything you despise: intolerance, narrow-mindedness, aggressive self-assurance. It is this irrational force of reaction, not just to the words, but to the very type of person that is a powerful signal. It points to that part of your own soul that was once rejected, exiled, branded as unacceptable. For if this trait did not resonate with something inside you, it would not cause such a storm. What if behind this repulsive mask of the enemy lies something you once forbade yourself in order to become good or right? We have spoken of ghosts, of those distorted reflections that haunt us in the mirror of political battles, when an opponent's face suddenly takes on the features of our own deeply suppressed self. The shadow, like an invisible artist, paints the most repulsive images on the canvas of reality, making us see in others only the embodiment of what we ourselves have rejected. But what if behind every such demon, behind every repulsive mask, lies something else, something that was once a living, potentially creative force, but was exiled, distorted, and now merely awaits its return in its pristine form? It is time to look behind the curtain of this projection and ask ourselves, what valuable capacity, what inherent right did you deny yourself when you so fiercely rejected these qualities, projecting them onto those you now demonize? For nature abhors a vacuum, and even in the most grotesque manifestation, one can find the distorted echo of original harmony. Take, for example, the image of the dogmatic fanatic whose uncompromising nature and blind faith in their own righteousness inspire chilling dread in us. We see in them a threat to reason, to dialogue, to the very possibility of coexistence. But what if behind this ossified, barren dogma lies something great? Perhaps it is your suppressed passionate conviction, an unwavering belief in ideals, which is capable of moving mountains if directed not toward destruction, but toward creation. It could be your own steadfastness of principles, which you once considered dangerous or inappropriate, fearing to become too categorical, too confident. You relinquish the right to hold deep, unshakable convictions, giving this right to them, thereby depriving yourself of inner support and clarity. Next, the hypocritical populist, whose sweet speeches and cunning manipulations evoke revulsion. We brand them for their lust for power, their lack of sincerity, their ability to play on the lowest instincts of the crowd. But consider, might not this caricature conceal your own rejected ability to influence others, to lead, to inspire? Perhaps you suppressed your natural inclination toward leadership, toward being heard, toward shaping public opinion, fearing being perceived as self-serving or manipulative. You denied yourself the right to charisma, to the ability to speak to an audience, to the pursuit of public recognition, categorizing these qualities as vicious and leaving them to them. And finally, the aggressive opponent whose overt hostility and readiness for confrontation are perceived as a threat to civilized communication. We see in them only destructive force, unbridled rage. However, if you remove the mask, might not your own ability to defend your boundaries emerge from beneath it? Your determination to uphold your interests and the interests of those you hold dear? Perhaps you suppressed healthy aggression within yourself, not the kind that seeks to destroy, but the kind that gives strength to fight for a just cause, to overcome obstacles, to assert your own will. You denied yourself the right to healthy confrontation, to defending your position with necessary force, to manifesting your inner power, fearing to be too harsh or too assertive. Each time we project these qualities onto others, we not only demonize them, but also impoverish ourselves, losing access to these powerful, albeit distorted, resources. We leave ourselves without a part of our own soul, without the ability to use these energies for good, turning them into a kind of unpaid debt that continues to weigh on our psyche and manifest in the most unexpected forms. Reflecting on how this inner asymmetry affects our external behavior opens new horizons for understanding not only the political stage, but also our own lives. For the non-acceptance of these aspects of our shadow has its direct and sometimes very painful consequences in the real world. We have discussed how deeply rooted anger towards political opponents is often merely an echo of unaccepted parts of our own self. How, by avoiding a meeting with our shadow, those qualities we once rejected as unacceptable or weak, we project them onto others, turning opponents into caricatured demons. But what is the price of this scapegoat game? How does our fear of being like these demonized images or of acknowledging their qualities within ourselves lead us to make disadvantageous decisions in the political sphere, restrict our expression of opinions, or avoid constructive dialogue? Imagine a dialogue that never took place. You stand on the threshold of an important discussion where different views on the future clash. Somewhere deep inside, you feel that in the arguments of the other side, however unbearable at first glance, there is a grain of common sense, or perhaps even a reflection of your own suppressed tendency toward dogmatism or, conversely, toward compromise. But the fear of being like them, rigid or conversely too soft, betraying your ideals, paralyzes you. You avoid direct confrontation, preferring to sit in your informational capsule where everyone speaks the same language and supports your point of view. And so instead of contributing to finding a solution, you remain on the sidelines watching as the situation worsens and polarization only strengthens. Your civic participation is reduced to passive indignation, not active creation. Or take another example, the inability to compromise. If others are the embodiment of evil, then any rapprochement with them seems like surrender, a betrayal of one's principles. You see them only as fanatics, populists, or aggressors onto whom you project your own suppressed qualities, passionate conviction that you are afraid to show yourself, or a desire for power that you consider unworthy. As a result, even if reaching a compromise could lead to real improvements for society, you reject it because it would mean colluding with the devil. A choice dictated by the fear of being tainted leads to a dead end, to a senseless confrontation that drains strength and deprives hope for progress. What about internal conflict? We often see how people genuinely striving for good find themselves trapped by rigid group dogmas. Perhaps you yourself have caught yourself thinking that some actions of your side seem ambiguous, even questionable. But to admit this aloud, to question your own, means potentially to become an outsider, to become like those very demons who, according to your group, are wrong about everything. This fear of being expelled from the tribe forces you to suppress your own critical thinking, to silence doubts, and sometimes even to actively participate in what internally causes revulsion. This leads to a deep internal division, to a loss of integrity that slowly but surely undermines your personality. But they are truly evil, you might say. Their actions are destructive, their words false. And yes, undoubtedly, real evil exists in the world. There is falsehood, there is violence, there are actions that cannot be justified. Acknowledging your own shadow does not mean justifying others' wrongdoing. It is not a call for universal forgiveness or a naive denial of problems. On the contrary, it is a call for clarity. When we stop projecting our internal conflicts onto the external world, we begin to see the situation as it is, without distortion. We stop being prisoners of our own fears and prejudices. We gain the opportunity to act not from an instinctive reaction to projection, but from a conscious position that allows us to more effectively confront real evil, if it exists, and to find constructive paths where possible. This allows us not only to oppose what we consider destructive, but also not to become its mirror image. Understanding this mechanism, which turns us into blind hostages of our own projections, opens the door to a completely new level of awareness and freedom. However, beyond the qualities we reject and project as evil, there's another side of the coin, our deepest admirations and ideals, which we can also unconsciously transfer to others, depriving ourselves of their true power. We have spoken of the shadow, of those rejected fragments of our soul that we project onto others, seeing monsters in them. This is a dark mirror, distorting reality, turning an opponent into the embodiment of everything we hate and deny in ourselves. But there is another side to this metaphysical coin, a side bathed in light, yet no less insidious. This is a phenomenon that Carl Jung called the golden shadow. And if the ordinary shadow is our internal refuse that we dump on someone else's lawn, then the golden shadow is our unrevealed treasures, our dormant talents, our true power, which instead of claiming we generously bestow upon others. We see them in someone else, admire them to the core, revere them, believing that these qualities belong exclusively to our idols, but certainly not to ourselves. This is a subtle, barely perceptible form of self-sabotage, where we voluntarily relinquish our crown, placing it on the head of someone we believe deserves it more. In the political landscape, especially amidst increasing polarization, the golden shadow plays a role no less destructive than its dark counterpart. Recall that blind, almost religious adoration of a charismatic leader who seems to embody all virtues: wisdom, strength, foresight, unwavering principle. We project onto them our own unrealized capacities for leadership, for deep, penetrating analysis, for influence, for uniting people around an idea. We believe that only they can save or guide because we ourselves do not believe in our own ability to lead, analyze, or influence. Or take the ideal politician, party, or even flawless ideology. We endow them with absolute honesty, infallibility, perfect knowledge, a projection of our own yearning for truth, for justice, for ideal order. We give them our capacity for deep conviction, for moral fortitude, for impeccable logic, believing that these qualities are their monopoly, and we are merely humble followers, incapable of such inner purity or intellectual power. This projection of admiration is the subtlest poison. It sabotages us, robbing us of initiative and inner strength. We become passive spectators of someone else's play, enthusiastically applauding those who, in our opinion, embody our best qualities, instead of becoming those qualities ourselves. This leads to dependence, to disappointment when the idol inevitably reveals their human imperfection, for no one can eternally bear the burden of others' golden projections. Consider, who is your idol or object of admiration in the realm of politics, social activism, or civil society? It could be a specific person, group, movement, or even an abstract idea. What are your own talents and unrealized capacities? For example, the ability to lead, to analyze deeply, to influence, to unite people, to build effective strategies, to fearlessly defend justice that you have given to them without acknowledging them within yourself. This is not an idle question. It opens the door to understanding how much energy, how much potential we give away externally instead of claiming it for ourselves. And until we reclaim this golden treasure, we will feel incomplete, dependent, and at times powerless in the face of the very political forces that, it would seem, should have inspired us. True strength isn't found in seeking an ideal leader, but in awakening the leader within yourself. We've discussed the shadows and phantoms that distort opponents' faces, turning them into monsters, and the golden mirages where we project ideals, thereby disempowering ourselves. Yet, knowledge without action is merely an echo, and understanding without application is an empty sound. The time has come not just to observe these projections, but to engage in a profound act of alchemical transformation, to reclaim everything that was given away and to become the author of your own complete reality. This isn't merely psychotherapy. It's a new philosophy of being for an era of polarization. It's a philosophy that asserts your strength lies not in being flawless, but in being whole. Your ability to influence, engage in dialogue, and defend your convictions without aggression or despair directly depends on how fully you have accepted yourself with all your lights and shadows. When you project, you surrender a part of your energy and your capacity for action. You become reactive instead of proactive, a puppet on the strings of others, or more accurately, your own unacknowledged projections. To sever these ties and reclaim true power over your psyche and consequently over your engagement with the world, I propose a simple yet profound exercise. Let's call it the opponent's mirror. Choose a political figure, group, or even an abstract political phenomenon that evokes particularly strong negative emotions in you. Not just disagreement, but anger, disgust, contempt, a sense of powerlessness, or deep irritation. Now focus on one specific quality in them that infuriates, outrages, or deeply bothers you. Perhaps it's their apparent intolerance, blind fanaticism, aggressive rhetoric, naivety, hypocrisy, or an unshakable conviction in their own righteousness bordering on dogmatism. Isolate this quality. For example, their arrogance drives me crazy, or their inability to see nuances is simply outrageous. Now, with the deepest honesty, look within yourself. Ask yourself, when in my life have I displayed or do I display this exact same quality? Perhaps in childhood, when I was stubborn and wouldn't listen to my parents. Perhaps in youth, when I was rigid in my judgments. Perhaps now in relationships with loved ones at work, or even in my internal dialogues. Is it possible I suppress this quality within myself, fearing being bad, yet it still erupts in the form of judging others? This is not about finding blame. It's about seeking truth. It's an archaeological excavation of your own soul. You might discover that you were once just as dogmatic, but suppressed it because society condemned such a trait. Perhaps you are prone to aggression yourself, but deem it wrong for you, which is why it seems intolerable in others. When you find this quality within yourself, when you acknowledge its existence in your own history or in your suppressed impulses, a miracle occurs. The projection weakens. The image of the enemy loses its demonic hold. They become simply another human being who, like you, carries the full spectrum of human qualities. You are not obligated to agree with their actions or ideas, but you reclaim the energy previously spent on hatred and rejection. You begin to see the world more comprehensively rather than through the distorted lens of your own shadow. The same principle applies to the golden shadow. But if you admire someone's courage, analytical mind, or charisma to the point of idolization, ask yourself, where is my courage? Where is my analytical mind? Where is my charisma, which I perhaps don't dare to express? By reclaiming these qualities, you gain not just self-sufficiency, but a genuine inner foundation that allows you to be an active, influential participant in life, rather than just an observer. Embracing your shadow is not a weakness. It is the highest form of strength. It is the path to wholeness, to true autonomy, and to the ability to act from the center of your being rather than reacting to external stimuli. And it is this wholeness, this inner balance, that opens the doors to an entirely different level of interaction with the world. From this state, authentic leadership is born, not leadership that manipulates the masses, but one that inspires because it is genuine, profound, and free from internal conflict.